This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer yourself, please visit www.librivox.org. Today's reading by Alex Foster, www.alexfoster.me.uk. A Journey to the Interior of the Earth by Jules Verne. Chapter 26. The Worst Peril of All. It must be confessed that hitherto things had not gone on so badly, and that I had small reason to complain. If our difficulties became no worse, we might hope to reach our end, and to what a height of scientific glory we should then attain! I had become quite a Liedenbrock in my reasonings. Seriously, I had. But would this state of things last in the strange place we had come to? Perhaps it might. For several days, steeper inclines, some even frightfully near to the perpendicular, brought us deeper and deeper into the mass of the interior of the earth. Some days we advanced nearer to the centre by 1.5 leagues, or nearly 2 leagues. These were perilous descents, in which the skill and marvellous coolness of Hans were invaluable to us. That unimpassioned Icelander devoted himself with incomprehensible deliberation, and thanks to him we crossed many a dangerous spot which we should never have cleared alone. But his habit of silence gained upon him day by day, and was infecting us. External objects produce decided effects upon the brain. A man shut up between 4 walls soon loses the power to associate words and ideas together. How many prisoners in solitary confinement become idiots, if not mad, for want of exercise for the thinking faculty? During the fortnight following our last conversation, no incident occurred worthy of being recorded. But I have good reason for remembering one very serious event which took place at this time, and of which I could scarcely now forget the smallest details. By the 7th of August, our successive descents had brought us to a depth of 30 leagues. That is, that for a space of 30 leagues there were over our heads solid beds of rock, ocean, continents and towns. We must have been 200 leagues from Iceland. On that day the tunnel went down a gentle slope. I was ahead of the others. My uncle was carrying one of Ruhmkorff's lamps, and I the other. I was examining the beds of granite. Suddenly, turning round, I observed that I was alone. Well, well, I thought, I've been going too fast, or Hans and my uncle have stopped on the way. Come, this won't do. I must join them. Fortunately, there is not much of an ascent. I retraced my steps. I walked for 1/4 of an hour. I gazed into the darkness. I shouted. No reply. My voice was lost in the midst of the cavernous echoes which alone replied to my call. I began to feel uneasy. A shudder ran through me. Calmly I said to myself, I am sure to find my companions again. There are not 2 roads. I was too far ahead. I will return. For half an hour I climbed up. I listened for a call, and in that dense atmosphere a voice could reach very far. But there was a dreary silence in all that long gallery. I stopped. I could not believe that I was lost. I was only bewildered for a time, not lost. I was sure I should find my way again. Come, I repeated, since there is but one road, and they are on it, I must find them again. I have but to ascend still. Unless indeed missing me, and supposing me to be behind, they too should have gone back. But even in this case, I have only to make the greater haste. I shall find them, I am sure. I repeated those words in the fainter tones of a half-convinced man. Besides, to associate even such simple ideas with words, and reason with them, was a work of time. A doubt then seized upon me. Was I indeed in advance when we became separated? Yes, to be sure I was. Hans was after me, preceding my uncle. He had even stopped for a while to strap his baggage better over his shoulders. I could remember this little incident. It was at that very moment that I must have gone on. Besides, I thought, have I not a guarantee that I shall not lose my way? A clue in the labyrinth that cannot be broken. My faithful stream. I have but to trace it back, and I must come upon them. This conclusion revived my spirits, and I resolved to resume my march without loss of time. How I then blessed my uncle's foresight in preventing the hunter from stopping up the hole in the granite. This beneficent spring, after having satisfied our thirst on the road, would now be my guide among the windings of the terrestrial crust. Before starting afresh, I thought a wash would do me good. I stooped to bathe my face in the Hansbach. to my stupefaction and utter dismay, my feet trod only the rough, dry granite. The stream was no longer at my feet. End of chapter 26. Recorded in Nottingham, England on the 16th of January 2006.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Journey to the Interior of the Earth by Jules Verne. Chapter 27. Lost in the Bowels of the Earth. To describe my despair would be impossible. No words could tell it. I was buried alive, with the prospect before me of dying of hunger and thirst. Mechanically, I swept the ground with my hands. How dry and hard the rock seemed to me. But how had I left the course of the stream? For it was a terrible fact that it no longer ran at my side. Then I understood the reason of that fearful silence, when for the last time I listened to hear if any sound from my companions could reach my ears. At the moment when I left the right road, I had not noticed the absence of the stream. It is evident that at that moment a deviation had presented itself before me, while the Hansbach followed the caprice of another incline, had gone with my companions away into unknown depths. How was I to return? There was not a trace of their footsteps or of my own, for the foot left no mark upon the granite floor. I racked my brain for a solution of this impracticable problem. One word described my position. Lost. Lost at an immeasurable depth. 30 leagues of rock seemed to weigh down upon my shoulders with a dreadful pressure. I felt crushed. I tried to carry back my ideas to things on the surface of the earth. I could scarcely succeed. Hamburg, the house in the Königstrasse, my poor Graubünden, all that busy world underneath which I was wandering about, was passing in rapid confusion before my terrified memory. I could revive with vivid reality all the incidents of our voyage, Iceland, M. Fredriksson, Snæfell. I said to myself that, if in such a position I was now in, I was fool enough to cling to one glimpse of hope, it would be madness, and the best thing I could do was to despair. What human power could restore me to the light of the sun by rending asunder the huge arches of rock which united over my head, buttressing each other with impregnable strength? Who could place my feet on the right path and bring me back to my company? "Oh, my uncle!" burst from my lips in the tone of despair. It was my only word of reproach, for I knew how much he must be suffering and seeking me wherever he might be. When I saw myself thus far removed from all earthly help, I had recourse to heavenly succor. The remembrance of my childhood, the recollection of my mother, whom I had only known in my tender early years, came back to me, and I knelt in prayer, imploring for the divine help of which I was so little worthy. This return of trust in God's providence allayed the turbulence of my fears, and I was enabled to concentrate upon my situation all the force of my intelligence. I had 3 days' provisions with me, and my flask was full. But I could not remain alone for long. Should I go up or down? Up, of course, up continually. I must thus arrive at the point where I had left the stream, that fatal turn in the road. With the stream at my feet, I might hope to regain the summit of Snæfell. Why had I not thought of that sooner? Here was evidently a chance of safety. The most pressing duty was to find out again the course of the Hansbach. I rose, and leaning upon my iron-pointed stick, I ascended the gallery. The slope was rather steep. I walked on without hope, but without indecision, like a man who has made up his mind. For half an hour I met with no obstacle. I tried to recognize my way by the form of the tunnel, by the projections of certain rocks, by the disposition of the fractures, but no particular sign appeared, and I soon saw that this gallery could not bring me back to the turning point. It came to an abrupt end. I struck against an impenetrable wall and fell down upon the rock. Unspeakable despair then seized upon me. I lay overwhelmed, aghast. My last hope was shattered against this granite wall. Lost in this labyrinth, whose windings crossed each other in all directions, there was no use to think of flight any longer. Here I must die the most dreadful of deaths. And strange to say, the thought came across me that when some day my petrified remains should be found 30 leagues below the surface in the bowels of the earth, The discovery might lead to grave scientific discussions. I tried to speak aloud, but hoarse sounds alone passed my dry lips. I panted for breath. In the midst of my agony, a new terror laid hold of me. In falling, my lamp had got wrong. I could not set it right, and its light was paling and would soon disappear altogether. I gazed painfully upon the luminous current growing weaker and weaker in the wire coil. A dim procession of moving shadows seemed slowly unfolding down the darkening walls. I scarcely dared to shut my eyes for one moment for fear of losing the least glimmer of this precious light. Every instant it seemed about to vanish, and the dense blackness to come rolling in palpably upon me. One last trembling glimmer shot feebly up. I watched it in trembling and anxiety. I drank it in as if I could preserve it, concentrating upon it the full power of my eyes, as upon the very last sensation of light which they were ever to experience, and the next moment I lay in the heavy gloom of deep, thick, unfathomable darkness. A terrible cry of anguish burst from me. Upon earth, in the midst of the darkest night, light never abdicates its functions altogether. It is still subtle and diffusive, but whatever little there may be, the eye still catches that little. Here there was not an atom. The total darkness made me totally blind. Then I began to lose my head. I arose with my arms stretched out before me, attempting painfully to feel my way. I began to run wildly, hurrying through the inextricable maze, still descending, still running through the substance of the earth's thick crust, a struggling denizen of geological faults, crying, shouting, yelling, soon bruised by contact with a jagged rock, falling and rising again bleeding, trying to drink the blood which covered my face, and even waiting for some rock to shatter my skull against. I shall never know whither my mad career took me. After the lapse of some hours, no doubt exhausted, I fell like a lifeless lump at the foot of the wall and lost all consciousness. End of chapter 27. Krista McQuillan, Tokyo, Japan, November 5th, 2005. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Journey to the Interior of the Earth by Jules Verne. Chapter 28. The Rescue in the Whispering Gallery. When I returned to partial life, my face was wet with tears. How long that state of insensibility had lasted I cannot say. I had no means now of taking account of time. Never was solitude equal to this. Never had any living being been so utterly forsaken. After my fall, I had lost a good deal of blood. I felt it flowing over me. Oh, how happy I should have been could I have died, and if death were not yet to be gone through, I would think no longer. I drove away every idea, and, conquered by my grief, I rolled myself to the foot of the opposite wall. Already I was feeling the approach of another faint, and was hoping for complete annihilation, when a loud noise reached me. It was like the distant rumble of continuous thunder, and I could hear its sounding undulations rolling far away into the remote recesses of the abyss. Whence could this noise proceed? It must be from some phenomenon proceeding in the great depths amidst which I lay helpless. Was it an explosion of gas? Was it the fall of some mighty pillar of the globe? I listened still. I wanted to know if the noise would be repeated. A quarter of an hour passed away. Silence reigned in this gallery. I could not even hear the beating of my heart. Suddenly my ear, resting by chance against the wall, caught, or seemed to catch, a certain vague, indescribable, distant, articulate sound, as of words. This is a delusion, I thought. But it was not. Listening more attentively, I heard in reality a murmuring of voices. But my weakness prevented me from understanding what the voices said. Yet it was language, I was sure of it. For a moment I thought the words might be my own, brought back by an echo. Perhaps I had been crying out, unknown to myself. I closed my lips firmly, and laid my ear against the wall again. Yes, truly, someone is speaking. Those are words. Even a few feet from the wall I could hear distinctly. I succeeded in catching uncertain, strange, undistinguishable words. They came as if pronounced in low, murmured voices. The word For Lurid was several times repeated in a tone of sympathy and sorrow. "Help!" I cried with all my might. "Help!" I listened. I watched in the darkness for an answer, a cry, a mere breath of sound, but nothing came. Some minutes passed. A whole world of ideas had opened in my mind. I thought that my weakened voice could never penetrate to my companions. "Is it they?" I repeated. "What other men can be 30 leagues underground?" Again I began to listen. Passing my ear over the wall from one place to another, I found the point where their voices seemed to be best heard. The word for Lurid again returned, then the rolling of thunder which had roused me from my lethargy. "No," I said, "no, it's not through such a mass that a voice can be heard. I'm surrounded by granite walls, and the loudest explosion could never be heard here. This noise comes along the gallery. There must be some remarkable exercise of acoustic laws." I listened again, and this time I did distinctly hear my name pronounced across the wide interval. It was my uncle's own voice. He was talking to the guide, and for Lorad is a Danish word. Then I understood it all. To make myself heard, I must speak along this wall, which would conduct the sound of my voice just as wire conducts electricity. But there was no time to lose. If my companions moved but a few steps away, the acoustic phenomenon would cease. I therefore approached the wall and pronounced these words as clearly as possible. "Uncle Leidenbrock." I waited with the deepest anxiety. Sound does not travel with great velocity. Even increased air density has no effect upon its rate of traveling. It merely augments its intensity. Seconds, which seemed like ages, passed away, and at last these words reached me. "Axel! Axel, is it you?" Yes, I replied. "My boy, where are you?" "Lost, in the deepest darkness." "Where is your lamp?" "It is out." "And the stream?" "Disappeared." Axel, take courage." "Wait, I am exhausted. I can't answer. Speak to me." "Courage," resumed my uncle. "Don't speak. Listen to me. We have looked for you up the gallery and down the gallery. We could not find you. I wept for you, my poor boy. At last, supposing you were still on the Hansbach, we fired our guns. Our voices are audible to each other, but our hands cannot touch. But don't despair, Axel. It is a great thing that we can hear each other." During this time I had been reflecting. A vague hope was returning to my heart. There was one thing I must know to begin with. I placed my lips close to the wall, saying, "My uncle!" "My boy," came to me after a few seconds. "We must know how far we are apart." "That is easy." "You have your chronometer?" "Yes." "Well, take it. Pronounce my name, noting exactly the second when you speak. I will repeat it as soon as it shall come to me, and you will observe the exact moment when you get my answer. Yes, and half the time between my call and your answer will exactly indicate that which my voice will take in coming to you." "Just so, my uncle." "Are you ready?" "Yes." "Now attention. I'm going to call your name." I put my ear to the wall, and as soon as the name Axel came, I immediately replied Axel, then waited. 40 seconds, said my uncle. 40 seconds between the two words, so the sound takes 20 seconds in coming. Now, at the rate of 1,120 feet in a second, this is 22,400 feet, or 4 miles and a quarter nearly. 4 miles and a quarter, I murmured. It will soon be over, Axel. Must I go up or down? Down, for this reason. We are in a vast chamber with endless galleries. Yours must lead into it, for it seems as if all the clefts and fractures of the globe radiated around this vast cavern. So get up and begin walking. Walk on, drag yourself along. If necessary, slide down the steep places. And at the end you will find us ready to receive you. Now begin moving. These words cheered me up. "Good-bye, uncle," I cried. "I am going. There will be no more voices heard once I have started, so good-bye." "Good-bye, Axel. Au revoir." These were the last words I heard. This wonderful underground conversation, carried on with a distance of 4 miles and a quarter between us, concluded with these words of hope. I thanked God from my heart, for it was He who had conducted me through those vast solitudes, to the point where, alone of all others perhaps, the voices of my companions could have reached me. This acoustic effect is easily explained on scientific grounds. It arose from the concave form of the gallery and the conducting power of the rock. There are many examples of this propagation of sounds which remain unheard in the intermediate space. I remember that a similar phenomenon has been observed in many places, amongst others on the internal surface of the gallery of the Dome of St. Paul's in London, and especially in the midst of the curious caverns among the quarries near Syracuse, the most wonderful of which is called Dionysus's Ear. These remembrances came into my mind, and I clearly saw that since my uncle's voice really reached me, there could be no obstacle between us. Following the direction by which the sound came, of course I should arrive in his presence, if my strength did not fail me. Therefore I rose, rather dragged myself than walked. The slope was rapid, and I slid down. Soon the swiftness of the descent increased horribly and threatened to become a fall. I no longer had the strength to stop myself. Suddenly there was no ground under me. I felt myself revolving in the air, striking and rebounding against the craggy projections of a vertical gallery, quite a well. My head struck against a sharp corner of the rock, and I became unconscious. End of chapter 28. Read by Krista McQuillan, Tokyo, Japan, November 5th, 2005. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Chapter 29. Thalatta, Thalatta. When I came to myself, I was stretched in half darkness, covered with thick coats and blankets. My uncle was watching over me to discover the least sign of life. At my first sigh he took my hand, and when I opened my eyes he uttered a cry of joy. "He lives! He lives!" he cried. "Yes, I'm still alive," I answered feebly. "My dear nephew," said my uncle, pressing me to his breast, "you are saved." I was deeply touched with the tenderness of his manner as he uttered these words, and still more with the care with which he watched over me. But such trials were wanted to bring out the professor's tenderer qualities. At this moment Hans came in. He saw my hand in my uncle's, and I may safely say that there was joy in his countenance. "Goddag," he said. "How do you do, Hans? How are you? And now, uncle, tell me where we are at the present moment." "Tomorrow, Axel, tomorrow. Now you are too faint and weak. I have bandaged your head with compresses which must not be disturbed. Sleep now, and tomorrow I will tell you all. But do tell me what time it is, and what day." "It is Sunday, the 8th of August, and it is 10 at night. You must ask me no more questions until the 10th. In truth, I was very weak, and my eyes involuntarily closed. I wanted a good night's rest, and therefore I went off to sleep, with the knowledge that I had been 4 long days alone in the heart of the earth. Next morning, on awakening, I looked round me. My couch, made up of all our travelling gear, was in a charming grotto adorned with splendid stalactites, and the soil of which was a fine sand. It was half light. There was no torch, no lamp, yet certain mysterious glimpses of light came from without through a narrow opening in the grotto. I heard, too, a vague and indistinct noise, something like the murmuring of waves breaking upon a shingly shore, and at times I seemed to hear the whistling of wind. I wondered whether I was awake, whether I was dreaming, whether my brain, crazed by my fall, was not affected by imaginary noises, yet neither eyes nor ears could be so utterly deceived. It is a ray of daylight, I thought, sliding in through this cleft in the rock. That is indeed the murmuring of waves. That is the rustling noise of wind. Am I quite mistaken, or have we returned to the surface of the earth? Has my uncle given up the expedition, or is it happily terminated? I was asking myself these unanswerable questions when the professor entered. "Good morning, Axel," he cried cheerily. "I feel sure you are better." Yes, I am indeed, I said, sitting up on my couch. You can hardly fail to be better, for you've slept quietly. Hans and I watched you by turns, and we noticed you were evidently recovering. Indeed, I do feel a great deal better, and I will give you a proof of that presently, if you'll let me have my breakfast. You shall eat, lad. The fever's left you. Hans rubbed your wounds with some ointment or other of which the Icelanders keep the secret, and they've healed marvellously. Our hunter is a splendid fellow. Whilst he went on talking, my uncle prepared a few provisions, which I devoured eagerly, notwithstanding his advice to the contrary. All the while I was overwhelming him with questions which he answered readily. Then I learnt that my providential fall had brought me exactly to the extremity of an almost perpendicular shaft, and as I had landed in the midst of an accompanying torrent of stones, the least of which would have been enough to crush me, the conclusion was that a loose portion of the rock had come down with me. This frightful conveyance had thus carried me into the arms of my uncle, where I fell, bruised, bleeding, and insensible. Truly, it is wonderful that you have not been killed 100 times over, but for the love of God, don't let us ever separate again. We may never see each other more. Not separate? Is the journey not over, then? I opened a pair of astonished eyes, which immediately called for the question, What is the matter, Axel? I have a question to ask you. You say that I am safe and sound. No doubt you are, and all my limbs unbroken. Certainly. And my head? Your head, except for a few bruises, is all right. It is on your shoulders, where it ought to be. Well, I am afraid my brain is affected. Your mind affected? Yes, I fear so. Are we again on the surface of the globe? No, certainly not. Then I must be mad. For don't I see the light of day, and don't I hear the wind blowing, and the sea breaking on the shore? Ah, is that all? Do tell me about it. I can't explain the inexplicable, but you will soon see and understand that geology has not yet learnt all it has to learn. Then let us go, I answered quickly. No, Axel, the open air might be bad for you. Open air? Yes, the wind is rather strong. You must not expose yourself. But I assure you I'm perfectly well. A little patience, my nephew. A relapse might get us into trouble. We have no time to lose, for the voyage may be a long one. The voyage? Yes. Rest today, and tomorrow we will set sail. Set sail? And I almost leaped up. What did it mean? Had we a river, a lake, a sea to depend upon? Was there a ship at our disposal in some underground harbor? My curiosity was highly excited. My uncle vainly tried to restrain me. When he saw that my impatience was doing me harm, he yielded. I dressed in haste. For greater safety, I wrapped myself in a blanket and came out of the grotto. End of chapter 29. Read by Kristen McQuillan, Tokyo, Japan, November 5th, 2005.